Have you ever met someone for the first time, barely exchanged 2 sentences with them, and immediately, for no reason you could point to, not been able to stand them, not disliked them in a mild way, reacted to them? Something about the way they spoke or carried themselves or laughed landed in you like static, sharp, immediate, completely out of proportion to anything they'd actually done. You probably told yourself a story about why. They seem arrogant. There's something off about them. I just don't trust people like that. And maybe all of that's even true. Carl Jung would have asked a different question. Not what is it about them, but what is it about you that they're the one who gets to set it off? It's a strange experience because it doesn't feel like a question at all in the moment. It feels like a verdict. You don't think, I wonder why this person bothers me. You think, this person is bothersome. Full stop, as though it were a fact about them you'd simply discovered, the way you discover someone's height. The reaction arrives fully formed, with its own evidence already attached before you've had any chance to examine it. And because it feels like a fact rather than a feeling, it almost never occurs to you to ask where it actually came from. Jung's concept of projection describes something the mind does constantly, almost entirely without our awareness. It takes qualities, feelings, or impulses that exist inside a person, usually ones that person hasn't recognized or accepted in themselves, and experiences them as though they belong to someone else. This isn't the same as simply having an opinion about someone. Projection has a particular texture to it, a charge and intensity, a reaction that arrives faster than thought and feels completely justified from the inside. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Not because the other person did nothing, they might genuinely be arrogant or dishonest or careless, but the size of your reaction, the part that feels personal, disproportionate, almost physical, that part is rarely about them at all. That part is yours, on loan, looking for somewhere to land. The strange thing about projection is that it's invisible from the inside. You don't experience it as I am projecting something onto this person. You experience it as this person is exactly as irritating as I think they are. Full stop. No further questions. That's what makes it projection rather than just an opinion. An opinion can be examined. A projection feels like a fact. This is part of why projection is so hard to catch in real time and so easy to see in hindsight. In the moment, the reaction feels seamless. There's no gap between I noticed something about this person and this person is like this. The seam only becomes visible later, usually when something shifts the angle slightly. A friend who doesn't share the reaction, a moment where the irritating person does something kind and the reaction doesn't budge, or simply time passing and the intensity not making sense anymore, even to the person who felt it. None of these moments prove the original reaction was wrong. Exactly. They just reveal that there was a seam there all along, a join between what was actually happening and what got added to it. Invisibly, the instant it arrived. The most common material behind a strong negative reaction to someone is shadow. The parts of yourself you've learned to suppress, deny, or simply never developed because somewhere along the way, those parts weren't acceptable. Claire worked on a team with someone she found almost unbearable to be around, a colleague who, in meetings, would state opinions plainly, take up space without apologizing for it, and never seemed to second guess himself the way Claire constantly did about her own ideas. She described him to friends as arrogant, self-important, exhausting. And from the outside, this read as a completely ordinary workplace complaint. What Claire hadn't considered until a friend gently asked her, half joking, would it be so bad if you did that? Was that the quality she found most unbearable in him was something she'd spent years training herself not to do. Taking up space, stating things plainly, not apologizing. Somewhere early on, Claire had learned that doing those things made her too much. And so she'd put that part of herself away. Watching someone else do it freely, without consequence, without even seeming to notice it was a choice, didn't just annoy her. It hit the exact spot where she'd buried something of her own. This doesn't mean the colleague wasn't, in fact, a bit much sometimes, but the intensity, the part that kept Claire awake replaying his comments, that intensity was hers. What made this especially difficult for Claire to see was that her reaction to her colleague wasn't even consistently negative. It was charged in a way that pure dislike usually isn't. She found herself watching him in meetings more than she watched anyone else. She remembered his comments days later, replaying them, building arguments she never delivered. Pure indifference doesn't behave like this. Indifference forgets. What Claire was experiencing had the texture of fascination wearing the mask of irritation, which, once she could see it, was almost more uncomfortable than the irritation alone had been. It's one thing to dislike someone. It's another to realize you've been quietly preoccupied with them for months, for reasons that had very little to do with anything they'd actually done. Jung wrote that knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people, not because it makes other people's behavior acceptable, but because it changes where the charge is coming from, and charges that are correctly located tend to lose most of their grip. If someone gets under your skin in a way that feels bigger than the situation warrants, try asking privately, with curiosity rather than self-criticism. Is there a version of this I've never let myself do either? Projection isn't only negative. Jung also describes something sometimes called the golden shadow. Unrecognized positive potential, qualities or capacities a person has but has never developed or claimed, which can get projected onto others just as readily as a dark material does. This often shows up as intense admiration, fascination, or the kind of immediate pull towards someone that feels almost disproportionate. I don't know them at all, and I already think they're remarkable. Noah started a new job and immediately found himself fixated on one particular colleague. Not romantically, just aware of her constantly. She seemed to know exactly what she wanted, spoke up in meetings without hesitation, made decisions, and moved on without the agonizing Noah put himself through over much smaller things. He found himself watching how she operated, almost studying her, with a kind of intensity he couldn't fully explain even to himself. It wasn't until months later, in an unrelated conversation, that Noah realized what had actually been happening. He wasn't just admiring her, he was looking at a version of confidence and clarity that he had, somewhere, a long time ago, decided wasn't available to him. She wasn't showing him something foreign, she was showing him something dormant. What made this realization land for Noah wasn't a single dramatic moment, it was something almost embarrassingly small. He'd been telling a friend, half joking, that he should just ask her how she does it, the confidence thing, as though it were a technique she could hand over in conversation. His friend, not unkindly, pointed out that Noah had been saying some version of this about other people for years. Different jobs, different people, always someone who seemed to have access to something Noah described as just out of his own reach. The pattern wasn't really about any of those people individually. It was about a single quality, showing up again and again, wearing a different person's face each time, because Noah hadn't yet recognized it as something that could wear his. There was a particular moment Noah kept returning to without understanding why at the time. His colleague had been asked in a meeting a question she clearly didn't know the answer to, and instead of deflecting or over-explaining, she simply said, "I don't know. Let me find out," and moved on, completely unbothered. Noah replayed that exact exchange for days, not because it was remarkable, because he knew with total certainty that if it had been him, he would have spent the rest of the meeting and probably the rest of the day quietly reviewing what that moment had revealed about him. The gap between her reaction and the one he imagined for himself was the entire thing. That gap was what he'd been staring at the whole time. If there's someone you find yourself unusually drawn to, watching, almost studying, it can be worth asking, gently, what are they doing? That some part of me already knows how to do and just hasn't been allowed to yet? Jung described a complex as an emotionally charged pattern, often formed early, that operates somewhat independently. And one of the clearest signs that a complex is active is repetition. Not one person who irritates you disproportionately, but a type, the same dynamic, with different faces across years, jobs, friendships, relationships. For Claire, the colleague wasn't really an isolated incident. Looking back, she could trace a long line of people, going back to school, to early friendships, to a parent who had occupied roughly the same role. People who took up space the way she'd learned not to, and who got under her skin in roughly the same way every time. Different names, same charge, same shape. Claire, looking back with this in mind, realized something else. The people who'd occupied this role in her life were almost never people she disliked on first impression. The reaction tended to build, a slow accumulation over weeks as she watched them do, repeatedly and without apparent cost, the exact things she'd never allowed herself to do even once. It wasn't the first instance that triggered the complex, It was a repetition. Proof each time that the things she'd put away could apparently be picked up by someone else, worn openly, and nothing bad happened to them for it. This is usually the moment a projection stops being just an annoying coworker and starts being information. If you notice the same type of person setting off the same reaction again and again across completely different contexts, that's not a coincidence, and it's not proof that the world keeps producing the same difficult people. It's much more likely a complex, replaying the same scene with a rotating cast. This is often the most useful, nested, and most uncomfortable thing to notice because it reframes the question entirely. It's no longer, why is this particular person like this, which has no satisfying answer, because the honest answer is that the person is just a person doing whatever they're doing for their own reasons that have nothing to do with you. The more useful question becomes, why does this type keep getting cast in this role in my life specifically? That question has an answer. It might take a while to find it, but it exists, and it's about you, not in a self-blaming sense, but in the sense that it's the only part of this equation you actually have access to. The other person was never going to be the one who could explain it. Jung was clear that the goal here isn't to stop having reaction to people, or to pretend other people's behavior doesn't matter. The goal, part of what he called individuation, is withdrawing the projection, recognizing what's yours and taking it back so that what's left is a much smaller, much more manageable reaction to whatever the other person is actually doing. This doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't mean every reaction you ever have to anyone is secretly about you. Sometimes a difficult person is just a difficult person. But when a reaction feels outsized, when it follows you home, when you keep replaying it, when the same type of person keeps producing the same size of reaction, that's usually the projection, asking to be looked at rather than acted on. What's often on the other side of that look isn't shameful. It's usually something quite ordinary. A part of yourself that got put away a long time ago for reasons that made sense at the time. And that's been waiting this whole time for someone else to wear it first. There's also a quieter benefit to this that's easy to miss. Withdrawing a projection doesn't just change how you feel about the other person, it often changes how you feel about yourself in the same motion. The quality you couldn't tolerate in them, once you recognize it as something you've also been carrying, just hidden, just unused, stops being purely a liability. It becomes something with two sides. The way most disowned qualities turn out to have two sides once they're actually looked at. The arrogance you couldn't stand might, examined honestly, be sitting next to a confidence you've never let yourself have. Taking the projection back means taking both. If someone's been living in your head rent-free lately, the colleague, the acquaintance, the person from one conversation you can't stop thinking about, it might be worth asking just once, quietly, what is it about them that's actually about me? Not to defend them, just to find out. None of this requires confronting anyone or even mentioning any of it out loud. The work, if it can be called that, happens entirely on your side of the interaction, which is, in a strange way, good news. It's the only side you ever had any real influence over to begin with. Everything else was always going to keep doing whatever it was already doing, regardless. If you've ever realized, after the fact, that someone who irritated you was showing you something about yourself, tell us what it was and how long it took you to see it. Some of these take years. Some take exactly one offhand comment from a friend who's known you a while, said at exactly the right moment, when you happen to be ready to actually hear it.